Now that we have some widgets to display dialogue with, we can actually start building a component to drive what dialogue should be run. We're going to start with just making the components and adding a function to just display a one-off message. And then after we do that, we're going to get into behavior tree based stuff a little bit later, and that's mostly how we're actually going to be driving most of this dialogue. There is a bunch of different ways that we could drive dialogue. We're going to be using behavior trees here, but you could also do something with data assets, or if you want to get really fancy, you can make entirely custom assets and make like an entirely custom editor within Unreal, but that will take quite a bit more work. Maybe in the future we'll take a look at both of those options as well. So for now, let's go into our project, and we're going to be making a new blueprint class, and that will be a actor component. An actor component is just a component that doesn't exist in the world and only has functions and some data, but no visualization or no position. So we'll call this something like dialogue components. And this is going to be holding a handful of things, some functions and some variables. So let's make a variable first and foremost for our dialog box, because if you want to display multiple dialog boxes in a row, we don't actually want to remove and then re-add a new dialog box. What we'll do instead is we'll clear out the existing dialog box and just run new dialog on it. So we'll make that a dialog display object reference. Then we'll make a function, and we'll call that function something like run single dialog, the most basic function that we could have. And that is effectively just going to be the same thing that we did before. It's going to be creating a widget, it's going to be adding it to the viewport. It will create a dialog box widget and add it to our viewing widget. So we can just copy this over and paste it in. So create widget, add to viewport, create box, which is going to take in a text and a delay between letters for the typewriting effect, and that's going to be added to the widget stack of our dialog display widgets. So we'll just hook up the text that we want to display, and might as well also hook up the typewriter timing in there, and that's kind of everything there is to making the run single dialog. We can give these default values as well. So let's set up the default value for the time between to be 0.1. And then we can make an actor real quick to add this component to. So we can make this a character. We're going to do that in the future. But for now, we're just going to make a fairly simple, like normal actor, because it doesn't need to be a pawn. It doesn't need to be a character to have this component, at least not for the time being. Sometime down the line, that might be necessary to run the behavior trees, which is a downside of doing the behavior tree method, but behavior trees are just the easiest way to set this up. Let's call this a BP dialog actor, and to that we will add the dialog component. And real quick, just to make this immediately properly architected and scalable, we're going to make a quick blueprint interface. So we'll go down to where is blueprint, there it is, and there we will make a blueprint interface, and this will be dialog interface, or alternatively BPI for blueprint interface dialog. And this will simply be the function that we're going to be using. We don't really need an inputs or outputs for it, I don't think. All that we need to do is call this run dialog. On our dialog actor, in the class settings, we're going to go to implement interfaces, and we'll look for BPI, our BPI dialog, and that adds in our run dialog interface function right here. And in this case, that's just going to be the dialog component and run single dialog, which will take in the timing for the text typewriting thing and the actual text to display. So for now, let's say you're stupid. Realistically, what we want to do actually is promote this to a variable. We can just say dialog text, make that instance editable so that we can expose it to be edited on a per instance basis when we put them into the map. And now every single one of these actors, which actually let's give them some visualization. So let's just add a cube to them or something like that. We'll be able to say something different when we run that function on them. So like dialog actor, I'm just going to put a couple of them in the world, like one here, one there, and like one here. You can see they all have their own dialogue text field defaulted to "you're stupid," but I can set this one to something like "you're smart," and then this one will be "you're kinda just there," and then this one will default to "you're stupid still." So now how do we interact with those? We're just gonna set that up real quick in the character. I'm going to get rid of this. I mapped it to a debug F key instead of on begin play. And what we're going to do is on the debug F, we'll get a node to do a sphere overlap. The sphere position will be our actor's location, so get actor location. This is just a fairly basic like interaction system that we're going to be doing here. The object types, we're going to be like make an array. We'll do world static, and we're also going to do pawn, because eventually we're going to be interacting with some characters or pawns. We can even filter on certain actor classes. I don't really want to do that. Actors to ignore, I don't really care for at the moment either. That's going to get us out actors, but what we're going to do is we're going to for each loop over this. Make sure to set your sphere radius, by the way, to something around 500, maybe 1000. And what we're going to do here is actually, I don't want to do a normal for each loop. I want to do a for each loop with break, because the moment we find the first thing that we can interact with, we're going to break out of the loop. So we'll just run dialogue. That will be a message, and this will only work on actors that have the dialogue interface that we made implemented. So if this works, we want to break out. So we'll actually go back into here, and we do want to add an output, just like success, very simply. That's always going to return negative or false, unless we go into our dialogue actor here real quick. Event graph. And this now doesn't really work as an event anymore because it has a return type. So instead, it implements as a function because it has a return node. And we're just going to set the success to true. That way we have some feedback on whether or not we found something that will have a dialogue option for us. So we can right click and refresh this node, and it will have a success bool. And if we are successful, we're going to break out of the for each loop. So we'll interact with the first thing that can run a dialogue now. And let's make sure that the collision settings for this thing actually match the collision settings that we have here, because we are looking for world static or pawn. And this thing is set to world dynamic. So we can either change this, or we can just add world dynamic to that array. And that's what I'm going to do, because it might as well be in there, right? So once we have made sure of that, we can walk up to one of these things, press the F key, and it says, "You're kinda just there." And I think that's the dialogue from this one. So yeah, it doesn't pick the closest one necessarily. It says different stuff depending on which thing we are talking to. Now, for proper dialogue in a lot of games, maybe you don't want to be able to like walk around while this dialogue happens, especially once we start like implementing dialogue trees, which we're going to be doing at some point in the future. That's going to be a little bit annoying because we need to be able to interact with the UI, but as you're interacting with the UI, you probably don't want to interact with the game anymore. So we're going to go into our dialogue display widget here. That's the one that has the canvas panel and the vertical box. And on event construct, we're going to set the input mode. And here on event construct, we're going to add a node to set input mode to a game and UI. Get player controller for the player controller. So get player controller. And the widget to focus, we can just set to self. You can also use just set input mode to UI only. The reason we're doing it like this has mostly to do with being able to still use input actions easily. Otherwise, you need to do some like really quite annoying stuff to register input in your widgets. So this is just kind of an easier way of doing all that. And do make sure to set your flush input to true so that it clears out any inputs that you were maybe having while your input mode was set, such as walking around and such. So let's just make this a little bit more user-friendly. What we want to implement is a like continue button, or in this case, a cancel button. We might want to redo some of that implementation at some point when we get into the behavior trees, but for now, let's just build some basic stuff for it. So we have this dialog box, right? And there we have the typewriter effect. I want to, when we first press a button, let's do the spacebar button, I wanted to just immediately set it to the full string. I wanted to skip out on this for each loop. But for that, we will need another input. Just like the for each loop with break we just used, we want a break input for this one. So if we just get a for each loop with break, because it's just a macro, if we double click that, we can actually see how it does that. So the break goes into an assign variable node, and that just assigns a local boolean that gets tested together with the length of the array. And then it gets a not boolean, so it gets the opposite value of what the thing actually is. You can implement it however you want. And if that is provided into this branching node, as soon as we set this value to being true, it goes into the completed bin. So it stops doing what it was doing. So we can actually implement that fairly easily ourselves, because we have this macro for ourselves, and all that we can do is we can make a local bool, and then we can simply assign a value to that. That value is going to be true, of course, and we'll do that with an extra input. That's going to be an extra exec bin, and we'll just call that break as well. So we hook that up to there. And then we'll just simply get a not boolean just to keep consistent with how Unreal itself does it. And instead of just only checking the length from our array, we're going to be doing an and boolean and hooking up our new like not assigned boolean instead there. And that's how you add a break to your for each loop. It's actually really quite easy. And now we have that break. So now we can make a custom event, set text finished, something like that. That goes into the for each loop with break. And then on completed, we'll just set the text here. So from the text block to the full text variable. If we just naturally make it through the typing section, this is not really going to do anything, but this will ensure that if we run this set text finished, it's going to set the text fully to what it should in the end be. Then we'll also add a variable, type writer finished, and we will also set that to true at the end of the for each loop. We do this because when we press a button, we want it to finish the typewriter effect, like instantly. And then when we press that button again, we're going to just remove the widget from the screen. But for that, we need to know whether or not the typewriter has already finished at that point. So that is why we do that. Now, if we go back into dialog display, we were just in dialog box, but now we're back in dialog display. And here, now we can just add input actions. So for now, let's just add the input action for jump. And on started, I'm just going to print a string. So we can see if I jump around, you don't see any print strings. But if I walk up to one of these things and I press F and then I jump, you will see a print string. But I don't think you really want your character to be jumping around while there's like dialogue on screen, because that's a little weird, isn't it? So what we can do instead to fix that is after the event construct, we set the input mode to game and UI, but then we're also going to just disable the input on our player character. So we can get player character and we can disable input fairly easily. And that takes in a player controller as well. So technically we still have the game input mode set to true, but our player character is just not responding to our input anymore. So now only the UI will be responding. If we set it to UI only, the input actions won't work anymore, which is a little bit annoying. This is the generally easiest workaround to deal with that, in my opinion. So now you'll be able to see, I can walk up to this, press F, and pressing space will only print out hello, but I won't be jumping anymore. But that kind of brings up an issue, because how are we going to deal with literally anything happening at all? Well, that won't be that big a deal, because we're going to actually put some code into this jump action. So our add widget to stack function, we're going to set that as a variable real quick as well. So we can promote this to variable, and this will be the latest widgets. If you want to be sure that the latest widget that we added to this always is a dialog box, we can always cast this to the dialog box. And if that cast fails, we just don't do anything, and otherwise we set it. And we need it to be a dialog box reference anyway, so we might as well do that now that I think about it. So let's do it that way. We promote that to variable, and this will be last dialog box or something like that. Now, when we press our jump button, what we're going to do is we're going to get typewriter finished, And if typewriter is finished, we will just delete this entire widget. If the typewriter is not yet finished, we're going to finish the typewriter forcefully. So we can run the set text finished event that we just made. So if typewriter is not yet finished, we're going to set it to being finished. And then if we press jump again after that, we will re-enable the player character's input. That's quite important. So enable input, for which we'll need to get the player controller as well. And then we will simply remove from parent. So this thing is going to be removed from the viewport through that. So now we can walk up to one of these, press not space, press F in my case to talk to it. We can't do anything, but it's finished typing. So if I press spacebar now, it's going to re-enable my movement. And in between those, what you might want to do as well is set input mode to game only, because otherwise you have some weird stuff potentially happening. Flush input might as well, otherwise you're going to be jumping on the re-enabling. Because input mode gaming UI kind of messes with your camera sometimes. So setting it back to game only can be really quite useful. If we just real quick copy your smart over a few times so that it takes a bit longer to type out, you'll also be able to see that I can just instantly skip over the typewriter effect and make it finish the text. And then again, it just works the way it should. So now we have a easy to set up thing that we can just real quickly have a bit of like flavor text pop up into the world. Now, as one last order of business, we want to, when we run this single dialogue, we want to also set our dialogue box to be equal to the value of the widget that we create. Just in case we want to access it, we can simply access it through the currently active dialog box, the most recently created one, on our inventory components. Again, this will be something that's a little bit more relevant with the way we're going to be setting up the behavior trees going forward. For now though, that's a little bit of everything happening in this video. Next time, we're going to get into making the behavior trees and setting up dialogue systems that can have multiple different dialogues after each other, which also means that we're going to be changing around a few things that we did today. Like this, just immediately closing the widget. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to make that a little bit more intelligent, and the widget is going to be closed through the behavior tree instead. But that's all for next time. For now, thanks for watching. Hopefully it's been helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.